Welcome to our brand new series, I Choose Love. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Stewart, and you're in for a treat. We just cannot wait for you to go through this process of experiencing, of receiving and getting love at a brand new level. And one of the things we always want to do is give our facilitators, a few tips about how to make your group even more impactful. Dave, give us a couple thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, just one thing as you start this new series, we've just wrapped up 4 weeks of I Choose Joy, and we've got 4 weeks of I Choose Love. But I would take us back to the Great Commission, where Jesus told us to go make disciples of all nations. And implicit in that command is the idea that we're going to make disciples who make disciples. And so in order to do that, our groups need to multiply. Now, sometimes that's painful and difficult. You think, well, we're just getting close to each other. We got relationship. This is good. I'm growing. Why would I want to leave this group? But I think part of what we need to realize is God's given us a bigger mission, and it's to reach more people and to disciple more people. So some creative ways to do that that I've experienced or seen in the past is that rather than just sending one person off to go start a new group, is that maybe send 2 people or 2 couples go out to start a new group together. And then it's not so painful. One thing that I've done several times as a group leader is that I'll hand my group off to somebody else, and then I leave and I go start a new group. And so that's just a couple of ways.
And a way that makes it a little less painful if you have a home that facilitates it is, because people love the social time, is you can subgroup and have a group in the living room, group in the family room. At one point, I had one in the bedroom, one in the family room, literally one in the garage. We had 6 groups in my house. And then it was when 2 or 3 groups decided, hey, they went to another house. So that social component and the fun together, and yet, we went from 5 or 6 people to about 40 people in my house before we went to other houses. So God will show you what to do. I think it's that hard of saying we have to open our hearts and our doors to help other people.
Yeah, that's good. Well, one other thing is share your stories with each other. Yeah. Part of being in a group is going deep, and you can't go deep if people don't know your story, don't know your life. So one thing that I did in a group a few years ago was each week, one person would share their story. So rather than going around, because it'd take the whole group time for everybody to share their story, but just one person, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. And so every week we looked forward to at the start of group, well, we get to hear Julie's story this week or Bill's story. And we got to know each other fairly quickly in just a few months. And it helped us to empathize with one another and fall more deeply in love with one another. And it bonded us together as a group. So a couple of tips for you there. And let's jump into our teaching time.
Therefore, if there is any encouragement in Christ, if there is any consolation of love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others.
I don't know about you, but when I think of love, I tend to think of feelings, those kind of chick flicks, romance, being in love, falling in love, or other times it's like, I love the Warriors, I love pizza. It's one of those words that can mean almost anything and everything. And the Apostle Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is literally going to teach us what love looks like, what it means. And what I want you to know is that in one word, love gives. It's great to have good emotions, and we associate love with lots of different things. But from God's perspective, God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever would believe in Him shouldn't perish, but have everlasting life. When I think even about a definition of love that's helped me, it's a choice. It's I choose to love. That means that when I feel like loving, I can love. But when I don't feel like loving, I make choices to love. And in these first 4 verses, the context is a group of people that they love Paul and Paul loves them, but they're having some conflict. They're getting some persecution and some difficulty. They're having a hard time loving people outside the church. We learned that from the end of chapter 1. And I don't know about you, but the world that we're living in, it's getting harder and harder as a follower of Christ to love people outside. Second, there tends to be a problem inside the church when We look at chapter 4 later, we're going to find that there's a couple ladies that are really going at it. And there's conflict and there's power plays and people are taking sides. This all sounds pretty familiar like our life. And so in the first 2 verses, what he says is that God has given you encouragement and love and kindness, and in Christ, he has those 4 things that we studied. If there's any encouragement in Christ, if there's any love, any fellowship with the Spirit, and then he gives them a positive command, make my joy complete. And he says, make my joy complete by being of one mind. Have unity, one heart, same purpose. In other words, could you all get along? In light of all that God has done, I want you to really get along and give and care for one another. And then in verses 3 and 4, he kind of highlights the heart and the reason behind conflict in relationships. The negative command is do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, one translation, or I like the old one, vain glory. Don't do anything that basically the whole deal is, hey, look at me. It's kind of, this is my show, my Facebook page, my glory. This is my world. And conversations and priorities, life is really about me. Now, for most of us, we don't come off like that. But just personally, I think all of us would say we're all tempted to do some image management to kind of make people think a bit better of us than ourselves, and to turn most conversations from what's going on or where there's needs to, us. And so in essence, what we talked about, and here's what I would remind you, we have to declare war on personal selfishness, and then we have to go into training, if you will, to habitually put other people ahead of ourselves. None of this comes naturally. In the message, you'll remember I talked about the golden rule and the platinum rule. And you know the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, can't get better than that right out of Jesus' mouth. The platinum rule is in this passage. The platinum rule is do unto others as God has already done unto you. In other words, he's given, he's risked, he's loved. All the resources that we already need, we're secure, we're cared for, we're valued, we're special. So in light of that, what he says is then care, be a giver. A definition that's really helped me is love is giving another person what they need the most when they deserve it the least at great personal cost. Let me say that again. Now, I want you to think about those of you that are married. I want you to think about a kid that's making you crazy. I want you to think about, if you're a student, one of your parents right now, or a boss that's unreasonable. Love is giving another person what they need the most when they deserve it the least at great personal cost. And it's literally developing the habit by the grace and the power of God to have a mindset that says, and this is so hard for every person, but especially for Americans, where you say, I am second. I mean, there's a long line. I am second. Maybe there's an older lady or someone with a couple little kids that let them go first. Or are you ready for this? This is where I practice this. I used to drive. That person that is weaving in and out and then you get in this lane, then you get in that lane, and then, you figure out how everything works so that you speed up and then you switch lanes. I used to live under such pressure because I drove like a maniac, because where I was going, are you ready, was way more important than the thousands of other cars. And God convicted me of my grandiosity. Chip, don't you think everyone thinks where they're going is important? And I went into training, and I'm not saying you have to do this at all, but for 2 years, I went into training in my driving because I think it reflected a lot of my life. That the slow lane, I don't even believe in the slow lane. I don't like the slow lane. For 2 years, I drove in the slow lane, and if someone went super slow, I would pass them, and I just decided I would drive the speed limit and take my time and relax when I drove. And I really started listening to messages in the car, renewing my mind, and kind of get this idea that other people, where they're going, really matter. And then it began to sort of play out where my wife, the laundry was done. I thought, I'm going to put it away right now. Or little by little, I began to see that if I put others first, this emotion that I wasn't ready for of joy began to well up in my heart and in my soul. Now, I'm still a selfish person. I'm still learning to declare war on selfishness. But here's what I can tell you. You can choose with your roommate, your family situations, your work situations, and especially around here when you're driving, to have a I am second mindset. And what will happen is you will begin to see stress leave, and you'll begin to experience loving other people. And watch this, they'll respond differently. You know, in a work situation, why don't you go ahead? I'll pick that up. Or, you know what? I don't mind. I'll go pick that up for everybody and I'll bring lunch in. When you begin to serve people and put their needs ahead of your own, you're going to first resist it, and then you're going to experience some really powerful, deep relationships.
Well, here we are, week 1 of I Choose Love. Over the coming 4 weeks, you and your group are going to wrestle through some critical issues on how to become more loving people and how to represent Christ's love to the world. So before we jump into our group discussion, I'm going to have our group introduce themselves. So we'll start over at the end.
I'm Esther.
Hi, I'm David. We've been married for 32 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yes.
And you guys are only 38 years old. You married at 6.
Thank you.
My name is Vicki.
And I'm Rigo. I'm her husband.
All right. So the first question we're going to talk about, Pastor Chip was talking about how to have an I am second mindset of putting others before ourselves, not looking out only for our own needs. Not only Chip, but Philippians 2 talks about that. So let's talk about that idea. Describe a time and what was the outcome when you had to embrace that I am second mindset and serve somebody.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I grew up in a family that I was always first because I was the only son in the family, and I have 7 sisters.
Wow.
So
Wow.
my mom used to tell me when I was growing up, I never touched the ground until I was 3. So everybody carried me around. And being treated like that, always first. And then I got married to Esther. And it was hard to overcome that, I being always served. And being first, and then now I have someone that I love and I need to take care of her and also, find out, what her needs are and serving her.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to really understand how to do that.
Yeah.
So it was, through God's grace and mercy that I became a better husband serving her needs.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to mind for me right now is recently I unintentionally hurt somebody and it came out, and you know how it instantly goes, right? You're like, well, this is what I meant, or this is what, all that. And I just had to realize, okay, I am kind of like we're saying, I'm going to put them first. And so I called her up and said, apologized and talked through it and said, I'm really sorry that I hurt you. And that, that humbling moment of just admitting you were wrong and realizing, kind of opening your eyes to, wow, I've really hurt you. And my temptation is in my pride to say, I was right and here's why, but to not, and to set that aside. And then to see, kind of like we were talking about, kind of what's the outcome of that. They're like, restoration happens and it's worth it, right? And to just stay in my own pride and think, I don't care what you think. I was right. It just doesn't help anybody, so.
I guess for me is that putting the family first. When we're young, we're both professionals, really career-oriented, and we have our, goals ahead. And I realized my first baby came, and then he's on the road constantly. I'm working full-time, and guess who's suffering? My child. So I just realized that my family comes first. So that's when I decided that I'm second. So I put down my career down a little bit. That doesn't mean, but I started part-time instead of full-time, working from home. And so that my family could have, I'm more available for my family and less stressful. I think in long run, after all, I'm so glad I did it because I was able to enjoy my children more and support my husband better. I think that's what I family first. For me, yeah.
Serve them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now here years later, as you look back, I don't see any regrets on your face for making that sacrifice.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I think it was really a wise decision that I would probably recommend all the family, all the moms.
Yeah.
Yes.
And probably none of us would regret any of these things, right? Where
Yeah.
you serve and when do you look back and think, oh, I shouldn't have served?
Yeah, and actually, a lot of times that's what shakes you out of complacency and selfishness. Of wow, that was a blessing to me to get to take my New Year's Day and go help somebody, even though my back's sore the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
So let me throw it to the group now, and I would encourage you to open up and share your stories. Don't just stay at the surface level. Go a little deeper and talk about those things that really matter. And you'll find your love for one another deepening, care for each other growing. So have a great group time together.